Previously on Popping Collars.
I think the recent adaptations, the Roma Downey and who's the other guy, the Mark Burnett interpretations of the Bible, that is high camp, and it's unintentional camp because they're trying to make something that's going to, convey something about Scripture. I don't know what, but they're doing it in such a theatrical, over-the-top, ridiculous way. I mean, for God's sake, John the Baptist had dreadlocks. I mean, it's, what is that? What is that all about? And
that's Little John the Baptist. I think that's.
Oh, was it?
Little. Okay. Save them.
Okay.
Welcome to Popping Collars, the podcast that lives at the intersection between religion and pop culture, the show where priests, pastors, ministers, and religious thinkers from around the country weigh in on what people are binge watching, tweeting about, trolling on message boards, and celebrating on blogs. My name is Greg Knight. I am in Palm Beach, Florida, and I'm your host of this roundtable conversation with our guests, who this week include Richard Burden from Brookline, Mass. Hello, Richard.
Hey, Greg. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Glad to be here.
Dan Joslyn-Siemiatkoski from Austin, Texas. I'm going to have to get used to that. Austin, Texas, not Berkeley, California.
Yeah, well, as they say, Austin, not Boston.
And Anna Carmichael from Hood River, Oregon. Do I have that right, Anna?
Yeah, you do. The most beautiful place on earth, 60 miles east of Portland.
3 brand new voices for Popping Collars, and this is episode 21 of Popping Collars. Our topic is Sons of Anarchy. This is the story of Sam Crow, which is shorthand for the Sons of Anarchy Motorcycle Club Redwood Original, and more specifically, Jax Teller, the son of the founding president of the club. Now, the Sons are involved in a plethora of illegal activities: gun running, drug dealing, gang warfare. These are bad people doing bad things. But still, when viewed as a whole, we get individual portraits of what makes the men in this club and the women who support them who they are. You get the real sense that show creator Kurt Sutter had a mapped out story arc for each character going into this thing. So to get us going here, what character arcs stood out to you over the course of the show, and what made it compelling? Dan, you want to kick it off?
Interesting. In the pilot, in the first 3 episodes, it takes you a while to figure out what Sam Crow stands for, right? And it takes you a while just to get into the narrative and the backstory, right? And so Sam Crow is also this kind of figure, right? Sam Crow is sort of a hobgoblin who, is a fairy tale figure, a folk figure that the club embodies.
Or the homeless lady.
Who
I had to go back and check was in the pilot.
Yes.
I have skipped over the homeless lady over the course of the show,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah. And she pops up at a funeral scene, right?
Yeah, and she pops up in Ireland, too. She's
Really?
She's the character that Kurt Sutter has said explicitly, and he might be yanking people's chain, but he's said she's Jesus.
Right, which, it was solidified by the finale, right?
Right.
It's a little strange, though, because it's like a Jesus / Grim Reaper, kind of, because she seems to embody the, the image, the patch.
Mr. Mayhem.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayhem.
Yeah. Although I think she's sort of that element of mystery in the midst of what is kind of a grim reality world. The fact that she does show up throughout the series and is homeless and charming and shows up in Ireland, which is completely implausible. It's that there's that little element of mystery about that there maybe is something other in the world, other than something else in the world than just this kind of hard life that these people are desperately trying to hold on to.
Right. The transient woman, the homeless woman, this mysterious woman, there's sort of 2 parts in a way of these kind of meta figures that kind of inhabit the imagination. That's one of the things about the Sam Crow legend that I found really interesting.
That's a great point, because I came into the show on the finale of the first season. Was the first episode that much. I remember when they were talking about Sam Crow, I thought it was a character on the show. I thought it was like, oh, it's the president of the club, and I just haven't seen this character.
Right.
Mr. Crow.
The whole time they were talking about Sam Crow. Like, well, when is he going to show up?
Well, but I mean, Sam Crow is a character in and of itself. I mean, because it's the ethos also of the community there. You know, everybody knows what Sam Crow is and charming, but it's kind of this mysterious entity that you can't really engage in unless you're willing to violate your own morals and ethics.
Like the ideas behind sort of the homeless woman, I think the ideas that Kurt Sutter is trying to put out there are kind of larger ideas, but it all happens in this tiny little town in Northern California. So it feels really claustrophobic sometimes, the show, while dealing with kind of large issues at once. But Charming feels small, and I think it's supposed to feel small.
Right.
Yeah, and there's shows full of people who claim that they're living by a kind of morality, but it's not a morality. It's a code. It's a code of the gang. It's a code of survival. And so to get this contrast of what does actually moral living or ethical living look like? And of course, Unser is completely complicit. You know, for years he abetted everything the club did. He allowed the club to gestate and germinate. But when he retires, he finds something more. Even though he's complicit, he's living by something larger, which actually makes him a very ambiguous figure, right?
Yeah. Well, and in some ways, I think Tara is similar to Unser. I mean, she's almost like the female counterpart of Unser. I mean, she has a foot in both the real world, you know, the world where things are supposed to be normal, but because she's gotten involved with Jax, and, you know, there's that great image at the end of one of the seasons, I forget which one, where she and Jax are sitting at the head of the table, and it's just like the picture of his mom and dad, right?
Right.
And you kind of know at that point, like, she's crossed over into the dark side, if it were, you know, but she tries so hard for so long to maintain a sense of integrity, and yet she has these moments where you can tell that the club has really started to impact the way she sees the world. You know, at times she's willing to compromise the club, you know, in terms of trying to get out to move to Portland and things like this. So I feel like she really struggles with that, and yet she never addresses issues of, you know, the gun running and the drugs and the sex industry, and, you know, it's like she just kind of goes along with it. It's almost as if that doesn't register on her moral compass.
Right.
There's a really interesting parallel between the men and the women in the show, and one of the things that I really enjoyed about the show a lot is that it's ostensibly the show about a guy's motorcycle club and all of the stuff that they do, but it's really sort of largely about the women. It's about Gemma and Tara and Wendy, and they're the kind of driving force always underneath all of it and kind of behind the scenes. You know, the guys kind of go off and do all of the stuff that the guys do, but the women are there in these, you know, Gemma is just a fascinating character in so many ways.
Right.
You know, like every Shakespearean villain that he can think of is sort of, you know, piled into Gemma Teller, right? But I just found that interesting in terms of, you know, the show plays with racial stereotypes, it plays with gender stereotypes, it plays with all of these Shakespearean images and all of this biblical imagery as well. It's just, it's having fun with it on one level.
I agree with you. I think that Gemma is the villain of the piece. I mean, it's funny because Jax lives the whole series as we see his life unfold, never knowing that Gemma has a hand in his father's death, and goes to his own death, never knowing the full extent that his mother has been involved in sort of manipulating his life. manipulating the course of events in his life. There's those scenes where she's in the hospital, especially early on, where she's the one that's in the chapel all the time, right? She's always constantly in the chapel. And you want to think to yourself, okay, what's going on here? Is she looking for redemption, or is she actually kind of looking to see what is the antithesis to where she stands in life, right? It's this really kind of weird combative relationship, but also trying to figure out what's on the other side.
Well, if we're going to name check people, I'm thinking what you just said, Greg, it makes me think of Nietzsche, right? She's the perfect nihilist in some ways. She has knowingly rejected the morality of Christianity. And whenever she's in a dialogue about religion, she's like, oh, you still believe that? Especially, we saw it with Unzer, with a couple of encounters in the chapel. We see at the end with Nero. Whereas Nero, he's a criminal, but he's a good Catholic criminal, But, and really playing to type there, right? But, in some ways, she is the Antichrist. She is the will to power, in some ways, behind the scenes, as Richard says, she has her code, and her code is strength. But she plays that code of strength behind the scenes, not so subtly. There's another funny episode towards the end where Jax tells Ratboy and Happy to go babysit Gemma, and they all kind of put their heads down. He's like, "What, are you afraid of my mom?" You're like, yeah. I thought it was just great.
Well, her code is strength, and it's also, both she and Jax have the kind of same tragic flaw I see, which is that I'm going to protect my family. I'm going to protect what's mine at whatever cost. And it's that drive to protect what's mine that ultimately destroys everything.
That's a great point, because that's how the gangs function. Right? Is this is my world, this is my family, but it's the family you claim. I think we've talked about this on the show before. It's there's this family that you're born into and this family that you claim for yourself. And that's something that it's language that I find that we use in church a lot, right? People use family language a lot in church. I'm like, well, family is kind of weird. because
family could be.
You don't choose your family. I don't know. I like to think of churches in terms of teams. I'm on your team right now. Right? I may go to this other team sometime, but but I feel like that's kind of where Jax is at the end of the show when he's talking to his dad's initials on the rock, and he's saying, I tried to protect my family, and I tried to be an outlaw. And it's these two different callings, this family that he's chosen of Sam Crow, and this family that he was born into and has had. Even if you're not a gangster, that's something that resonates with you, right? This life that you kind of choose, and then, you're all priests. So this life that you choose,
not yet.
And then your families come in, and then your families come into play, and it's how do you make that work?
Right. Well, and there's also the tension of what's best for your church family. So, in the world of Sam Crow, what's best for the club versus what's best for your family at home. And oftentimes, I find that there is a tension there of choosing which world am I living in. Am I, Reverend Anna, or am I just Anna today? It can be unsettling at times, and having to deal with the puppet masters. I always thought of Gemma as a puppet master, that she was manipulative and controlling everything. And really, she sort of played out the trajectory of how all of that was going to pan out, and how we can sometimes feel that we are at the mercy of the puppet masters in our lives, be them our biological family or the family of the club or church.
There's the family dynamics and the family hierarchy, and then there's the pecking order that works in the club. That's one of the fascinating things to watch over the show is how new members of the club get brought in, right? And there's always this interesting turning moments of, sometimes they bring in a prospect, and you're like, seriously? That's going to be your gang member, this guy? No? Really? Right, but that's also how church is, right? You go to church, you're like, there's a bunch of freaks here.
Yeah.
We're going to do this? Okay.
We let anybody in here. That's right.
So it's the club wants loyalty, right? Like that's what makes you a good prospect. Now it's a question of like what makes a good prospect for a church. We seem a lot less discriminating in some ways.
Begging people to come in.
Yeah.
Well, they talk about going to church, right?
Right.
I mean, that's where they go to make all their decisions. Is they go to chapel, they go to church, right?
Yeah. They sit around their altar, their table. Yeah.
Right. That's why I see it as a tragedy of the system winning. You know, it's like, and that's, I guess, why I don't see Jax as a Jesus figure, despite the crucifixion, you know,
right at the end.
The ritualistic crucifixion right at the end, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a sacrifice without the resurrection. You know, it's what Holy Week is without the resurrection. The principalities and the powers win.
Yeah, and, Nero isn't a protective figure. Like, Nero's unable. Like, he's trying to extract himself from the gangster life by driving down south to buy his uncle's farm. But you think, is he really?
He's even named after the emperor.
Yeah.
The original Antichrist.
That's right. Kurt Sutter's not all that subtle sometimes.
I found the end a little bit more hopeful, I guess, because I'm an optimist.
Well, the one thing I was working with was seeing kind of you got the bread that our homeless woman was eating with the wine kind of. It was kind of a very Methodist symbol, like a little bit of wine snuck into the middle of the loaf there. With the blood flowing to it, but then you had the crow. And so actually the thing that I was thinking of was Elijah and the feeding of the crows to Elijah, was feeding the wilderness.
Right.
So there was a way I could take Greg and say there might be something possible here, but then on the other hand you think, well, this is just carrion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I wondered, I mean, even though I think Kurt Sutter tried to make Jax a Jesus type figure, I couldn't help but wonder, is he really maybe like trying to be the repentant sinner that is crucified next to Jesus? Like, he doesn't, I mean, he's still a sinner, right? Like, he still messes it up, but he's trying. So that was kind of how I left it. I was just like, well, he tried. Good for him. But he didn't quite make it, and
he believes he has to die, right? Like he told the club, it's Mr. Mayhem.
You've got to vote it. Yeah.
And they refuse to kill him.
Yeah.
And so he believes that his death is, if not atoning, is going to expiate. If we can remember the difference between atonement and expiation. But at least it's going to lift a burden off of the club.
It's hard to see repentance when you're on a murderous rampage. It's like when he's settling accounts, it's like I tend to go in Richard's direction. This is a soulless being. I mean, there's nothing left that's redeemable in Jax by the end of the show, and I would argue that there's really nothing left that's redeemable in Jax once Tara dies, except maybe his love for his boys. Otherwise, he's on a path to destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how many people get swept up in that wave of destruction is the only question that remains at that point. So in my mind, his mother is the Antichrist, absolutely. He's basically this soulless Messiah trying to save his club with no hint of, you're absolutely right, Richard, resurrection to offer.
Yeah. Now the character that I think does offer some glimmer of hope of kind of redemption, oddly, is Tig, who's like the most, like from the very beginning, is like the most extreme, crazy, on the edge, beyond the pale wacko that they've got, and he just becomes, once he falls in with, once he has the run in with Pope and his daughter is killed, that's a kind of he brings it back from there. And then once he falls in with the Walter Goggins character, just so wonderful, Venus, with so wonderfully played by Goggins, and that odd relationship that they have that just becomes kind of beautiful in its twisted way. I found his character arc to be really, really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really interesting. Tig gets, teased a little bit about his relationship with Venus, but they kind of just accept it. And the whole question of sexuality in our church and how we express love for, our partners and things like that. I just find it a very interesting parallel, having been at General Convention in 2012, where we really wrestled with the question of trans people in our community and whether or not we were comfortable with that, and can we ordain them, and can they be part of us? And this time at convention, we did spend quite a bit of time talking about the state of marriage, and, there was all this research done on it. But it's almost as if, we just had already gone, okay, trans, that's okay. We dealt with that last time, and it's all okay and kosher. So I just thought it was a really interesting, parallel between the two worlds that we live in. I think, too, that what's his name? The guy who is concerned that people will find out that he's not 100% white, and he tries to kill him. Juice. Juice is a fascinating kid, and he's so young. I mean, I just always feel like he's so young, and he's just so tormented. So I think he's fascinating as well.
At the end, he's sort of, if we're going to keep on using these kind of fancy literary terms, he's pathos, right? There's such a sadness to him by the end.
Yeah, and he starts out as really a background character who always just seems upbeat, charming, capable, happy. He's like he's the kid. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's the young one that's kind of excited to be in the club, excited to be a part of this thing, and to see how it just kind of scales down to this beaten down figure in prison by the end of it.
Yeah. There was one, as I was thinking about this, there was one scene of his that I thought was really interesting, that in terms of sort of the biblical imagery and, Jack's Jesus, and I was wondering, well, who's Juice then? And then there was that moment where Jax grabs him and kisses him and says, "You betrayed me." And I thought, wow, what an interesting kind of reversal of that biblical scene where it's Judas kissing Christ and the betrayer is there, but here it's completely reversed, and there is some of Judas in Juice. I think he wrestles with that kind of he wrestles with the actions that he does as being, if this really is the right thing for the club. I mean, he sides with Clay for a really long time, partly because Clay is kind of protecting him, but partly because I think he really does feel remorse about the whole betraying the club in the drug RICO thing. So he's he keeps trying to sort of make amends. And Juice is also really interesting in terms of the racial component of the show, because race is one of those things that I think gets played out. Race becomes a marker for that kind of invented family that we were talking about. That that there's the family that you come from, and there's the family that you choose, and all of the gangs are all sort of racially marked, and a lot of them are sort of family gangs kind of writ large in terms of racial components. And it's Juice, when they finally figure out that, nobody in Sam Crow really cares that his dad was black, right? And Sam Crow then is able to kind of, even patch in one of the grim bastards who's, one of these African American, that race kind of becomes a non-issue for them, because the bigger issue is the business, is the saving the business, saving the family.
Which stands in contrast to the Kings and the real IRA who refuse to do their business with anybody who's not white.
Exactly.
Right.
Whereas Sons of Anarchy are saying, hey,
on the ground.
We live in California.
It's all fine for you in Dublin, but but we're
I always the way that Oakland is treated on the show is really fascinating because gosh, is there even an episode where you see Oakland?
Yeah,
it's just treated like this world where that's where we send our guns. Yeah, that's where our money comes in.
There's tons of scenes shot in Oakland, but they never say meanwhile in Oakland.
Right.
It's just you see a warehouse, some chain link fence, we're in Oakland.
Yeah.
Except in season 7, it sort of becomes, well, are we in Oakland or are we in Stockton? They seem like the same place.
Right. To refresh my memory, just before we went on, I looked over the list of characters, the cast, and I saw the name Opie. And Opie, dies at the end of season 3? Only halfway, but he is this kind of counterweight to Jax in the first several seasons. And the way in which he dies as this kind of, if we're going to talk about a Christ figure, Opie's death, in which he sort of takes on for the club,
I got
this. I can do it. Now I'm going to take you all back to the Dream of the Rood, right? Where in Anglo-Saxon England, 9th century, the image of Christ on the cross is the strong warrior who gets himself up on the tree and puts his arms out and says, I'm strong enough to take this. Right? And for me, Opie is the Anglo-Saxon Christ figure.
No, I love Opie. I think that what strikes me about Opie every time I see him on the show is he seems to be constantly losing. Starting from the very jump, starting from the first season.
He's right out of prison. He's trying to go straight at the very beginning, right?
Well, first he loses the trust of the club. He loses his wife. He loses, and I think you're right. I think that it does stand in contrast to Jax, who seems to always find his way out of situations.
But ultimately loses his soul.
But there's this way in which, when he dies, the rest, it's Jax and Tig, I think Chibs, who watch him get killed. So there's a sense of the disciples, at the cross as well, right? And they can do. And you think for a minute he's going to win. You think for a minute he's not going to die in there.
He might pull it off,
but then he doesn't.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to see that you're basically signing up for a life of death, but it's kind of right there in the title of the show, right?
Is that?
It's not called the Sons of Pugs and Puppies. Yeah.
Right.
So that's a whole other game.
Okay, let's do our Go in Pieces segment. This is the opportunity for us to tell people how we can get in touch with them and how people can get in touch with us. We'll start with you, Dan. Where are you? What are you doing? How can people get in touch with you?
All right, so I teach church history at Seminary of the Southwest in Austin, Texas, which is a seminary of the Episcopal Church. You can get in touch with me via Twitter at Dan Joslyn-Sim, DanJoslynSiem, or you can go to my faculty profile at ssw.edu and figure out how to spell my last name.
I still don't know how to spell your last name.
Well, that's okay.
Anna, where are you? What are you doing? How can people get in touch with you?
Okay, so I'm the rector at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Hood River. So you can always find us on the web at stmarks-hr.org. I'm also on Facebook as Reverend Anna Carmichael, I think. My Twitter handle is Rev Anna in the Hood.
The other hood.
The other hood.
The other hood.
The actual hood.
Hood River.
A river, right?
Yeah.
Richard, where are you? What are you doing? How can people get in touch with you?
I am the rector of All Saints Parish in Brookline, Massachusetts, and you can find All Saints on the web at allsaintsbrookline.org. We also are on Facebook and on Twitter at All Saints Beeline. I am on Twitter at Rev Burden, and I'm trying to give Greg Knight a run for his money at being the most inconsistent Twitter user on the planet. So you will occasionally find me there.
My name is Greg Knight. I am the Director of Children and Youth Ministries at Bethesda by the Sea Episcopal Church in Palm Beach, Florida. You can find us on the web at bbts.org. You can find me on Twitter at @GregKnight, where I will not tweet. Poppin' Collars, however, will tweet at you at Poppin' Collars, where you can follow us. You can also friend or like us on the Facebook. We like giving people options here at Poppin' Collars, so you can do either. You can find our show at poppincollarspodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be iTunes or Stitcher or Blueberry or any of those podcast sites. But if you do find yourself on iTunes, throw us a review, throw us a rating, like Dan J.S., who threw us a review, and that's what got him on our show.
Hey, it can all be yours.
You can be on our show if you review us, I promise. Finally, each and every one of our shows are featured on EpiscopalCafe.com. We love EpiscopalCafe.com. They helped get you through General Convention, and they'll help get you through the next 3 years until the next General Convention. So check them out. They're a really great site. And with that, that is Poppin' Collars for this time. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Richard, for being with us. Keep those collars popped. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Greg.
What?